The first time they saw it lean, they laughed. Not out of cruelty, at least not all of them, but out of that simple frontier disbelief that anyone would let a cabin stand like that. It looked wrong, as if a gust might topple it over by dusk. It leaned to the east, like a drunken mule trying to sleep off a bitter night. The boards were crooked, the nails didn't sit right, and the doorframe had such a skew it had to be shouldered open with a grunt. And yet the widow and her daughter lived inside it, slept beneath that angled roof, and lit the stove each morning, as if the whole place wasn't one hard snowfall from collapse. By the time the town stopped laughing, it was too late to build anything else. Her name was Clara Dorsey, 32. Her husband, Elijah, had died 5 winters back in a logging accident that snapped 3 ribs and crushed the left side of his skull. Left her with a daughter, Sophie, just 6 years old at the time. Left her also with debt, some land on the outskirts of Briar Hill, and the half-finished bones of a cabin he'd started before the trees fell on him. The lumber was raw, untreated. The floor was patchy. The joists were misaligned. And when Clara, alone and unsure, tried to finish what her husband started, she did so with no plans, no help, and no second hands to hold the weight of roof beams or check her levels. So the cabin tilted, not by choice, but by the mercy of circumstance and gravity. She never fixed it. She couldn't. There was no money. And by then, the ridicule had set in like frost in old stone. Children called it the sideways house. Grown men made snide remarks about her slanted judgment. A few wives even whispered that any woman who lived like that, who let her own roof fall crooked over her head, must be broken inside too. Still, she stayed. She worked hard in silence, grew carrots and potatoes through dry spells, patched her daughter's skirts with flour sacks, kept a small stove burning low in the corner of that crooked room, the chimney rising at an angle that seemed ready to snap in a good wind. Each year before the first frost, she'd go around the place with mud and cloth, sealing cracks with layers of soaked burlap and packing any hole with whatever she could, sticks, wax, even manure if needed. It smelled, but it sealed. That winter, the one folks still talk about, came early. A cold snap blew down from the mountains and slammed into Briar Hill like judgment. The creeks froze over in a night. Water pails cracked. Horses died tied to posts because no one thought it would drop below 0 in October. They were wrong. The blizzard that followed wasn't part of any forecast. It rolled in silent and stayed. Days and days of snow, wind, and ice that turned cabins into traps and the town into a graveyard of half-frozen men struggling to keep their children alive. And it was during that week when the drifts reached halfway up windows and roofs collapsed beneath their own weight that the widow Dorsey's tilted cabin stopped being a joke. It started with the Thompsons, 3 of them, their roof beams split under wet snow, and the cold came in before they could block it. The baby was already sick, and there was no kindling left. Henry Thompson tried to melt snow with a kerosene lamp, but it shattered. Clara saw them trudging past in the dark, the baby wrapped in a soot-stained coat. She opened her crooked door without a word and let them inside. The stove barely warmed half the room, but the way that cabin had been packed, sealed like an earthen jar, it held the heat better than any place in town. Mud-crusted walls, quilts nailed over the windows, a dugout pit beneath the floorboards, where she stored heat stones she'd pulled from the coals at dawn. She'd stack them in iron pots and place them near the corners. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. 2 more families came by the 3rd night, then a 4th. By then, the town knew something strange was happening in that crooked place. Dozens of homes had lost heat, or roof, or both. Even the church was shuttered from collapse risk. But Clara's cabin, though tilted like it might fall on its face, held fast. It whistled and groaned, but never gave. Not to snow, not to ice, not to the weight of wind. Men who once snickered now huddled with their backs to her patched-up stove, arms around their children, chewing on dry roots she'd saved from harvest. One old man wept quietly beside the hearth, his boots still frozen to his feet. No one spoke much those first few days. Shame hung too heavy in the air, and still the snow came. The cabin, built for 2, now held 14. Some slept on the floor, others in corners. Clara gave up her own bed to an elderly woman who couldn't stop shaking. Sophie curled beside her mother beneath layers of wool, barely moving except to shift another hot stone toward her feet. It was hell, but it was warmer than anywhere else in the valley. Somehow that misaligned cabin had become a refuge. Then the chimney cracked. It happened on the 6th day. A gust howled down the hill, pushed a tree into the rear slope of the roof, and something shifted. Smoke poured in. The fire died. Panic set in. But Clara didn't cry. She didn't shout. She stepped out into the storm. No coat, no boots, just wrapped in a thick horse blanket, and hacked at the iced tree with a dull axe until her fingers bled. She cleared the snow, patched the chimney with clay, and lashed it with rope soaked in lard to keep it from freezing again. It wasn't elegant, but it held. When she came back inside, cheeks blackened with cold, hands raw, the room fell silent. No one laughed. No one even moved. That night, no one asked who should lead prayer. They just turned to her, and she didn't speak fancy words. She didn't even stand. She sat beside the stove, arms around Sophie, and whispered what little she remembered from her mother's hymn book. It was enough. 3 days later, the snow stopped. When the townsfolk emerged, blinking and pale, the scene was biblical. Trees snapped in half, cabins buckled, frozen cattle, their eyes iced over, graves hastily marked with sticks. But out on the edge of town, beneath the silver frost and twisted sky, one cabin stood crooked still, tilted just as it always had been, and inside it 14 people lived. No one called it the sideways house again, but the story didn't end with the storm, because the town would change after that, in ways no one expected, and the price Clara Dorsey paid for sheltering them all wasn't counted in coin. It was counted in something far deeper and far more dangerous, and it was just beginning. No one ever said, "Thank you," the day they left her cabin. Not really, not with words. They shuffled out stiffly, eyes low, cheeks roughened by frost and humility. The storm had passed. The sun returned in a pale, brittle way, lighting the world not with warmth, but with the eerie hush of a battlefield after the smoke. Townsfolk emerged from her tilted door, wrapped in borrowed rags and quilts, blinking at the carnage outside like men waking from a long and violent dream. Clara didn't follow them out. She stood in the warped doorway, Sophie clinging to her side, watching as they dispersed into the icy aftermath. No promises were made, no debts spoken, just footsteps crunching over brittle snow as the wind finally calmed and the cold began its slow retreat. She should have felt pride. Instead, she felt empty, and then she shut the door. For the next 3 days, no one came. No knocks, no voices, not even a whisper of gratitude carried on the breeze. Clara tended to the broken beams, patched where the tree had caved in a corner of the roof, and cleaned the floor of ash, muddy boot prints, and blood. She burned the rags, soaked with sickness, and tried to wash out the smell of cold sweat and fear that had seeped into every board. Sophie didn't speak much. She sat near the stove, tracing little shapes in the soot dust with one finger. "Mama," she asked once softly, "will they come back?" Clara didn't answer. She just wiped her hands on her apron and kept scrubbing. The truth was, word had spread, fast. The tilted cabin had saved them. Not all, but enough. The Thompsons survived. Old Mabel, the blacksmith's mother, lived. 2 of the Miller boys, a widower, a schoolteacher, and 3 children whose parents didn't make it back to their doorsteps after the storm. The town didn't forget that, but it didn't know what to do with it either. What did it mean that the crooked shack on the edge of town had survived what so many proud, upright homes could not? Some said it was luck, some whispered it was witchery, and some, perhaps the wisest, said nothing at all. But they all looked when she came into town, and they didn't laugh anymore. By the second week after the freeze, Mayor Haskett sent a man up the hill, official. "Business," he said. The man was Deputy Forson, young, clean-shaven, eyes dark with fatigue. He stood outside Clara's door, shuffling in the snow, hat in hand. He didn't knock at first, just stared at the lopsided frame and the patched roof, as if trying to make sense of what he saw. Finally, he raised a hand. Clara answered before the second knock. "Miss Dorsey," he said, giving her a respectful nod. "Mayor asked me to come. He'd like to see you." "Why?" "I don't know, Ma'am. He just said it's important." Clara held the door with one hand. The wind bit through her sleeves. Sophie stood behind her, arms wrapped around a kettle of boiled stones. Deputy Forson cleared his throat. "I think he wants to thank you, officially. Maybe see if you'll speak at the town meeting. There's talk of rebuilding efforts, a memorial, some kind of community gesture." Clara looked past him at the town, still scattered with half-buried shapes beneath snow mounds. "I don't need a gesture," she said. "I know," Forson replied, "but maybe the town does." She went, wore her husband's old coat, brushed her hair, took Sophie with her because she wouldn't leave the girl alone in that cabin even if the world burned. The meeting hall was cold, the stove barely lit. Half the pews were gone, used for firewood during the freeze. The people there, faces she'd once known, stared at her not with scorn, but something else, something unfamiliar, something she didn't quite trust. The mayor stood up and cleared his throat. He was a small man in a larger man's boots. Always had been, but this time, he didn't speak like someone giving orders. He spoke like someone asking permission. "Miss Dorsey," he said, voice wavering in the echoey hall, "you did something this town won't forget. I know. We weren't kind to you. I wasn't kind to you. You took us in, risked your own safety to save ours. And we want to honor that. The council voted. We'd like to provide lumber and labor to help you rebuild, straighten the place up proper, maybe even offer you a lot closer to town. A proper house, new walls, a real roof. Clara said nothing. All eyes turned to her. She could feel Sophie's hand tighten in hers. Thank you, Clara said quietly. But I don't want your lumber. I don't want a new lot. I don't want your help. A hush fell, not insulted silence, confused silence. I want one thing, she said. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm something to fix. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered. Clara stepped forward. You want to thank me? Fine. Then listen. This town's strong because of people, not houses. It wasn't straight roofs or cut boards that saved you. It was a place packed with clay and hands that wouldn't quit. It was the thing you all mocked, what you dismissed. You still don't see it. You're afraid of what doesn't look like it should. She paused. I'm keeping my house, crooked and all. Then she turned, took Sophie's hand again, and left. That was the last time the town tried to fix her, but it wasn't the last time they came. The children came first. They'd visit with baskets of dried apples or strips of smoked meat, not because they were told to, because they wanted to see the place that saved their friends. One girl even asked if she could stay the night, just to feel what warm really feels like, she said. Clara let her, and when she returned home, her father came the next day and offered to repair the door hinge, not straighten it, just fix the squeak. Then came the blacksmith. He offered to sharpen Clara's tools, not out of pity, just respect. Then the miller, who delivered sacks of cornmeal with no note, just a nod and a small smile. Even the pastor, who once refused to bless Elijah's grave because of rumors of debt, came one night and sat by her fire for hours without speaking. When he left, he said, "You reminded me what a church is supposed to feel like." Clara didn't seek praise. She wanted quiet and Sophie's laughter and wood that didn't split when it mattered. But the town began to bend in quiet ways. A few months after the thaw, people started packing their cabins with clay the way she had, quilts over the windows, dugouts beneath the hearth for coals and stones. No one said where they got the idea, but the tilted cabin had become a kind of silent teacher. It wasn't magic. It was survival made from what others called junk. Then came the inspector. Spring brought letters from the county seat, from rail companies, from a man named Malcolm Dawes, who said he represented the territorial survey. They were scouting routes, land evaluations, infrastructure expansions, and something in the county records had drawn attention to her land. Clara didn't understand it at first. The officials spoke fast, used words that didn't mean anything to her. Subsurface analysis, mineral rights, geothermal potential. All she knew was this. They wanted to buy her cabin, buy it, tear it down, and dig into the ground beneath. She refused 3 times, until one man arrived with a paper she didn't understand and said, "Ma'am, you may not have a choice." She threw him off her land. He came back with a deputy, not Forson, a different one. This one brought a notice, and that's when Clara realized it wasn't over. The storm had passed. But now the town wasn't facing cold. It was facing something colder, and she was about to be the only thing standing between it and ruin. The paper said, "Notice of seizure for mineral evaluation under County Directive 14.3. That meant nothing to Clara Dorsey, not in plain words, but the message behind it was clear. They were going to take her land, tilt or no tilt, stove or no stove, whether she signed anything or not. She stared at the document in the deputy's gloved hands. The man holding it wasn't cruel, he wasn't hostile, but he wasn't on her side either. His name was Pruitt, and he carried himself like a man used to telling others what they had to accept. "I don't want money," Clara said flatly. "It's not about want," Deputy Pruitt replied, shifting his feet in the mud just beyond her door. "This notice gives the county permission to assess lands of interest. Temporarily, you'll be compensated fairly." Compensated for what? For access, to tear up my yard, to knock holes in my floor and poke through my walls? Only if there's cause. It's just assessment for now. We're not the enemy, Miss Dorsey. You'll be paid, more than fairly, I'd wager. This could be a benefit to the whole town. She didn't say anything, because she already knew that phrase, benefit to the whole town. It was what they always said right before someone like her was trampled under the feet of everyone else's progress. That night she sat by the stove and watched Sophie sleep, her small chest rising and falling beneath the quilt. The wood crackled low, the boards creaked softly with the wind, the house still leaned, still groaned when you stepped just wrong on the northwest corner, still smelled faintly of stone, ash, and earth even months after the freeze passed. And Clara knew something the men from town didn't, that this place, this crooked, patched-up, laughed-at place, had something no money could touch. She hadn't built it right, but she had built it true. The next day, she walked into town, not quietly, not with eyes low. She wore her patched shawl, her old boots, and the same determined look she wore when she dug post holes in frozen dirt with bloodied fingers. The council was meeting in the saloon again. Half the town still used it for gatherings because the schoolhouse was being repaired and the church roof had rotted clean through. People turned when she entered. Some smiled, some didn't. She marched straight past them to the back where Mayor Haskett and 3 others sat around a rough plank table strewn with ledgers and plans. "I'm not letting them tear into my land," she said without preamble. The mayor looked up, blinked. "Miss Dorsey, this isn't personal. The county has a right to evaluate." "They didn't have a right when no one wanted the land," she interrupted. "They didn't care when I was living out there eating carrots half-rotted and sleeping in damp quilts. They didn't come asking what I needed when the roof caved in during the blizzard of '84. Now they want to measure it, claim it." "Clara, no, you say it's not personal. It is, to me, to the people who survived the freeze under my roof, to my husband, who died cutting logs to build that house, to my daughter, who's only alive because I sealed those walls with every ounce of strength I had." The room was quiet. Then someone in the corner, an older man, rough-faced and bitter-eyed, snorted. "Woman, if you think a tilted shack's more important than clean fuel and warm houses, you're out of your mind. They said there's heat in the earth under your place. Real heat. That's what geothermal means. They tap it, run pipes. It could save the valley next winter. No more burning dung and wet pine." Clara turned toward him slowly. "I saved your grandchildren," she said, her voice like iron. "In that tilted shack. Your daughter was in my pantry, holding a child so cold I thought her feet might fall off. Don't speak to me about saving the valley." The man fell silent. Mayor Haskett sighed. "We're not trying to punish you, but if you obstruct the survey, you'll be removed. Not by me, by the county." "I know." She walked out, didn't wait for anyone to stop her, because no one would. The trucks came a week later, 2 steam crawlers with iron drill arms and 3 wagons loaded with engineers in canvas coats and city boots. They brought paper maps, shovels, drills, and a set of stacked crates full of brass instruments Clara didn't understand. They didn't even knock. She watched from the porch as they moved over her garden, stomping through the tilled earth like it didn't matter. Sophie stood beside her, confused, small fingers clutching her mother's skirt. "What are they doing?" "They're looking for something," Clara replied, eyes steady. "Something they think matters more than what's already here." It wasn't just about heat. The surveyors found something else. Not gold, not silver, but pressure, deep in the soil, something they called a vent pocket. They said it was rare, that the geological compression beneath the Dorsey cabin created a kind of natural insulation chamber. The heat rose but didn't escape. The walls, slanted though they were, had trapped that warmth like a clay jar. "It's a miracle," one of them said, holding a glowing gauge in the half-dug trench by her well. Clara said nothing, because it wasn't a miracle. It was just a thing no one else had bothered to understand. The town changed again. This time it wasn't just gratitude. It was hunger, not for food, not for shelter, for what she had. Whispers began to spread. Couldn't we build more like hers? Couldn't we dig into her hill? Couldn't we buy her out and make a heating plant there? The mayor came again. He tried gentleness. "Think of the children, then guilt. Your husband would have wanted to help the town, then threats. If you don't sign, they'll invoke eminent domain." Clara didn't blink. "I buried Elijah under the tree line. I sealed my own windows with my own hands. I kept 40 people alive while your chimney collapsed and your schoolhouse froze. You want what's beneath me? You'll have to tear me out with it." He left, but that wasn't the end of it. 2 nights later, her cabin burned. Not all of it, just one wall, the north-facing corner where Sophie slept. Clara had gone out for water. Sophie had stayed inside. The fire had been set at the base. Kerosene, most likely. She smelled it before she saw the flame. The rush back, the screams, the frantic digging of snow to beat it down. She saved her daughter. She saved the cabin. But part of the wall was blackened, scorched to bone. The room was filled with smoke for 2 days. The sheriff came. He said he'd investigate. Said it could have been an accident. But Clara saw the looks on the street the next time she went into town. The averted eyes, the hurried steps. Not all of them were against her. Some looked ashamed. But shame doesn't hold back ambition. She sent Sophie away, to her cousin in Elk Ridge, 30 miles east. She told her it was just for a season, but the truth was darker. Clara knew the fire wasn't the end. It was a warning. The town wanted her out, even if most wouldn't say it out loud. And so, for the second time in her life, she prepared for a siege, not of snow and wind, but of men with papers, pens, and torches. She sealed her walls again, but not with clay. This time she used timber bolts, steel plates, a rifle under the floorboards, and she waited. Because the world outside had finally caught up to the storm, and now she would see if her crooked house could weather this new freeze. The freeze of hearts and ambition and law. They came just before dawn, not with torches, not this time, but with quiet boots and heavy intentions. There were 6 men, 2 from the county, 1 from the mayor's office, 3 hired hands with no names, just hard faces and blunt tools. They moved in silence like scavengers in the early light, armed with ropes, pry bars, survey flags, and the quiet certainty of men who believed the law was on their side. Clara Dorsey didn't answer their knock. She'd been up all night. The smell of scorched pine still clung to the corner wall, where the fire had blackened the outer logs. She hadn't scrubbed it away. She wanted to remember what they'd done, what they would do again if given half the chance. The cabin was silent but ready. Every floorboard had been checked. The stove was still warm from the early morning burn. A single kettle sat on the heat-stone pit, warming water not for tea but for pouring into cracks. Just one more trick to keep the place sealed and breathing like a living thing. They knocked again and again. Then a voice called through the door. "Miss Dorsey, you need to open up. We have orders." Clara sat at the edge of her crooked table, hands folded. Her rifle rested upright against the leg of her chair, not aimed, not loaded, just there, like a truth waiting to be spoken. "I have orders too," she called back. "Mine came from the dead, from the cold, from the days your mayor left you all to die, and I didn't." There was a pause, then footsteps retreating, then wood cracking. They weren't going to wait. The back wall was old, one of the first Clara had put up. It gave with 3 heavy strikes. The men came through like wolves dressed as bureaucrats, 2 shouldering the splintered frame, 1 already inside with a hammer raised to drive a marker into the floor. He never got the chance, because Clara stood between him and the hearth, eyes locked, arms folded. "I'll go to jail," she said flatly. One of the suited men, a narrow-shouldered clerk with wet shoes, spoke first. "No one wants that, Miss Dorsey. Please don't make this into something dramatic. You broke into my home." "It's not your home. Not entirely. The mineral rights are under review. County statutes make clear—" She took a step forward. "Just one. I don't care what your statutes say. You let me starve here. You let me patch these walls with nothing but ash and dung while you handed lumber to men who couldn't hammer a nail straight. You laughed. You all laughed." The clerk cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. "There's been hardship. We all lost things. People. We're trying to move forward." "No," she said. "You're trying to erase what you couldn't control." The man with the hammer moved, almost casually, toward the wall beside her stove. "Ma'am," he said, "we can either mark it gently or come back with force." She picked up the rifle, didn't aim it, didn't need to. The message was clear, and still, he kept walking until the front door opened. Deputy Forson stood there. He wasn't in uniform, no badge, no gun on his hip, just a man with wind-tousled hair and a cold look in his eyes. "Leave her be," he said. The men turned, confused. "Deputy," said the clerk, "this isn't your jurisdiction. This is a county issue. I'm not here in any official capacity." "Then you have no authority." Forson stepped inside, slowly, deliberately. "I'm not here for authority," he said. "I'm here because I stood in this house with my sister while she coughed blood into a quilt she didn't own. I watched Clara Dorsey tear her own curtains into strips to bind frostbitten hands. I saw her kneel in front of a stove that burned a single log for 12 hours because she'd lined the inside with scavenged brick." The room was quiet. Forson looked at each man in turn. "You think you're here for heat? For mineral rights? You're not. You're here because something in this cabin scares you. Not the lean of the roof, not the clay in the walls. It's the fact that it stood when your rules didn't, when your clean lines and level floors collapsed, when men like you sat in town halls making plans while women like her held up the sky with bare hands." The man with the hammer looked ready to speak. Forson raised his voice just slightly. "If you touch that wall, I'll throw you out myself. No badge, no orders, just me." They didn't move. They didn't retreat either. Clara spoke then. "You came for warmth," she said. "Then listen close. The warmth you're looking for isn't under this dirt. It's not a pressure pocket or a vent or some bubbling current beneath my floorboards. It's in the way this house wasn't meant to stand, but did. It's in the memory of every person who found breath here when the cold tried to take it. You tear it down. You don't get warmth. You get nothing." The clerk glanced to the others. Then, without a word, he folded the paper in his hand and backed away. The man with the hammer lowered his arm, and the tilted cabin breathed again. They didn't come back. Not with tools, not with papers, not with threats. Something in that moment turned the tide. Word spread, not just in Briar Hill, but across the county. Some called it a standoff. Others said it was a woman's madness met by a deputy's guilt. But the stories that lasted didn't come from town halls or papers. They came from the mouths of children who had slept on Clara's crooked floors, from elders who remembered the flicker of her stove in the deepest black of winter, from the hands of settlers who'd tried to copy her clay-packed walls and couldn't make them hold as warm. Winter returned, as it always did. The winds came, then the frost, and then the long nights that made grown men wonder if they'd see morning. But that year, something changed. The townspeople gathered, not in saloons, not in churches, but at Clara's cabin, voluntarily. Some brought clay, others brought straw, burlap, and tools, not to tear down, to learn. Clara didn't speak much, but she showed them how to pack a wall, how to place stones beneath a floor, how to seal a room not just from the cold, but from the forgetting. They called it the Dorsey method. Soon others were building tilted rooms, on purpose, small ones at first, then entire cabins, dug into hillsides, braced with waste stone and hardened dirt. The style spread, quietly. One spring, a rider came from the governor's office. He brought a parchment of apology and a land deed, officially registering Clara's claim, not just to the structure, but to the land itself, above and below. It was rare, unprecedented, some said. She hung the deed on her wall, beneath the cracked beam that once nearly gave way in the storm, left the crack unpatched. It reminded her that nothing perfect ever saved a life. Years passed. Sophie grew tall. She built her own house on a slope. It leaned, not as much as her mother's, but enough to make people talk, until winter came again, and her stove burned warm from just one log. The tilted cabin still stands, not straight, not grand, but full, always full, of warmth, of memory, of defiance that smelled like wood smoke and perseverance. Travelers come now. They knock not to assess or claim, but to ask, how did you do it? And Clara Dorsey, older now, grey at the temples but iron still in her spine, tells them, I didn't build it right. I built it the way I had. 2. And in a world where so many houses fall when the winds rise, that is enough. That is more than enough.